UFC Orlando is almost here. 15 fights, a lot for you and I to discuss. So I'll give you my final picks. We'll talk about what we need to do to be successful on this card, and we're going to build some lineups, so make sure you watch until the end. You can call me Kunith. Let's make some money this week. I know what you're thinking. Kunith, where have you been? Don't worry about it, sweetheart.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it, sweetheart.
Because we're back and we're ready to get after this card that's headlined by Kevin Holland, Wonder Boy. Great card and a lot for us to get through today. We're not going to waste another second of time. We're going to get right into it, work our way down the slate as always, starting at the very top, 9,600, Raphael dos Anjos. He's fighting Bryan Barberena this week. RDA is a lock and a half in this spot. You should put him in your parlays. You can do that with confidence to beef up the odds. RDA wins this fight 10 times out of 10. You can play him on Draftkings with a lot of confidence as well, because you're looking at a situation where he's going to be able to take Bryan Barberena down with ease, and he's probably better than Barberena is everywhere. RDA is the better striker, 10 times better grappler, and he's fought the best fighters in the world for the last decade. This is a considerable step down in competition for RDA. If we look at who he's recently fought, Bryan Barberena is totally outgunned here. And Barberena thrives in situations where he can wear on a guy. A battle of attrition is not the kind of fight that you're going to win against Bam Bam Barberena, but that's not the case this week. Now, I will say on the feet, it should be fun and it should be competitive. While I expect RDA to throw with more power, we know that Barberena is going to be throwing a lot of volume. That's what he does. The biggest issue with Bryan Barberena here, again, is that he can't defend a takedown. Now, he's not Vyacheslav Borshov levels of incompetent, but he's pretty damn close. And outside of his last fight with Robbie Lawler, he was taken down 22 times in just 4 fights. So RDA is going to take him down whenever he wants, and I fully expect him to find a submission this week. Easy fight for RDA, and I do say that loosely just because these guys are fighting at the highest level. I get that. There is no easy fight in the UFC unless you got matched up with Romano Pascal or something like that. But I do think that stylistically, RDA matches up very well against the brawler Barberena this week. Give me Raphael dos Anjos to win. Give me RDA to win by submission. Next at 9,500, we have Jonathan Pearce, JSP. He's going to be fighting the damaged Darren Elkins this week. This is a tough fight to call, and the line is pretty wide. On one hand, you have JSP, who's a huge favorite, and he has looked awesome in the UFC, and of course, he has all the tools to win this fight. For betting and for DraftKings especially, you have to love the high pace that he fights with, that relentless chain wrestling, and the finishing ability that JSP brings to the table. He's the much younger fighter here, obviously right in his fighting prime. He's fighting Darren Elkins, who has a lot of miles on him, has been in a lot of wars, and you're looking at a situation where he's older, but he's still going to keep fighting. He recently signed a new contract. But the challenge presented here by the matchmakers is that X factor that Darren Elkins has, that moment when he goes from regular Darren Elkins to the damage. And I could see that happening around the 7.5 minute mark, about halfway through the second round. Especially if this fight gets off to a crazy start like Jonathan Pearce's last fight against Makwan Amirkhani. If these guys are going back and forth, taking each other down, getting into scrambles, punching each other in the face, then you're looking at a situation where halfway through the fight, you might see Darren Elkins start to pick up some steam. Obviously, JSP has good cardio, but it's abandoned him a little bit in recent fights, and we're looking at a situation where no one is going to out-cardio Darren Elkins, at least not in the weight class. And while JSP has great offensive wrestling, he has average to below average takedown defense. He gave up 3 takedowns against Makwan Amirkhani, and most of that was happening in the first round. Now, JSP goes on to win that fight, but I don't think it was a great performance by him, just because Makwan Amirkhani put himself in bad positions, low fight IQ, gassed out, not a really good showing for Makwan Amirkhani. JSP gets the job done. Before that, JSP almost loses against Christian Rodriguez, drops the third round to Christian Rodriguez, who, might I remind you, is a bantamweight who was making his UFC debut on short notice up a weight class. JSP gave up takedowns and gave up position in that fight, and if Makwan Amirkhani had him in bad spots and Christian Rodriguez had some success, I think that the grappling and the pressure from Darren Elkins could lead to a long night for Jonathan Pearce. So I see paths to victory for both of these guys, and given Elkins' age, all the wars that he's been in, JSP's power could take over. He could knock him out early. I think that's on the table. But Darren Elkins could also do what Darren Elkins does best, drag this kid into deep water and then find a finish later in this fight, or at least steal the second and third round. And I want to take a look at just some of these really big favorites that we have here, like RDA, Jonathan Pearce, Matheus Nicolau, Yasmin Jauregui, you've got Marc Diakiese, Kyle Daukaus, Pavlovich, Natan Levy. Not all of these fighters are going to win. You need to identify the spots where there's upside, the other fighter has a chance, and I think this is a situation where the damage by decision looks pretty good. JSP is solid, and I would pick him over a lot of other guys in the division, but the line is crazy wide, and I think that Darren Elkins is a little bit too cheap. I don't know if he's getting enough respect here for what I know he can do. So give me Darren Elkins to win. Give me Darren Elkins by decision. It might sound crazy, but I can see Darren Elkins getting it done in this spot. Now, this next fight, from a DraftKings perspective, it's really interesting. You have Matheus Nicolau sitting at 9,400 versus Matt Schnell. Nicolau typically doesn't score well on DraftKings, right? We saw in his last fight against David Dvorak putting up 58 DraftKings points. It's terrible. This is a high price to pay for a guy who's pretty low output for the most part, position over submission, and he's against a tough guy in Matt Schnell who's going to make him work. Now, what's interesting about this fight, though, is that on the other side, you have Matt Schnell, who's coming off the comeback of the year, maybe comeback of the decade, and I wouldn't be surprised if you saw a lot of the public start going toward Matt Schnell this week. I'm not saying a crazy number, but if he's around 20% in a lot of your contests, I wouldn't be surprised. Recency bias plays a huge factor when it comes to betting, especially in MMA, because there's so little to go off of. So I think that a lot of people will go the Matt Schnell route, and I think it's a big mistake this week. Matt Schnell makes a lot of mistakes, like a lot of mistakes, and Matheus Nicolau is one of these guys that makes very few mistakes. So you have a cleaner, tighter fighter versus somebody who's willing to take chances, willing to take risks, but they don't always pay off. If we just look at Matt Schnell for a second, Su Mudaerji was beating him like he stole something. Let's be real. And we picked him to win that day. We absolutely picked him to win that day. We didn't think it would go that way because Su Mudaerji was kicking Matt Schnell's ass, but Matt Schnell ends up toughing through it. A lot of referees would have stopped that fight. I'm surprised that the ref didn't. Happy that the ref didn't. But after landing so many strikes and hurting Schnell so many times and looking for the finish time and time again, Su Mudaerji gassed out. Matt Schnell ends up putting it on him, and that was all she wrote. If Su Mudaerji doesn't overextend himself in that spot, then he probably wins, and all he had to do was maybe wobble Schnell one more good time. Against Brandon Royval, had some success early, hit Brandon Royval with a good shot. As soon as they get to mixing it up on the mat, he gets caught with a submission. He drops a fight to Rogerio Bontorin. He wins against Tyson Nam in a pretty low output contest. Gets floored pretty quickly against Pantoja. So you're looking at a situation where Matt Schnell's a talented guy. He has a lot of skills, but he hasn't done that well against higher level competition. And I think Matheus Nicolau is one of these guys who you're really going to have to do something major to get him off of his game. You're going to have to hit him with a ton of power, or you're going to have to catch him with a submission, but I don't see that happening anytime soon for this guy. Matheus Nicolau is very solid. I think he wins. I think Matheus Nicolau by decision is probably the most likely outcome here. From a DraftKings perspective, he probably scores 75 points, if that. But at the same time, he's going to come in at very low ownership. So if you're willing to take a shot at this guy who's probably going to be one of the lowest owned fighters on the entire slate, you have a good opportunity to get a lot of leverage over the field. But I warn you, Matheus Nicolau historically does not score all that well. If you think he goes out there and finishes Matt Schnell, you should plug him into your lineups because nobody's going to play this dude. You already have him in 100% of your lineups. Oscar, do you think you're a better DFS player than me? Then why do I beat you every week when we play head-to-head? Why? Because I'm cheating? How am I cheating? Because I roster women's MMA? It's because I'm smart, Oscar. And speaking of women's... MMA, next at 9,300, we have Yasmin Jauregui. She's going to be fighting Istela Nunes this week. Istela Nunes is on the burger list. Istela Nunes weak, man. I don't know if she's totally on the burger list, but she's burger list eligible because she gassed out against Sam Hughes, and that's not a good look. Istela Nunes is solid on the feet, of course, but she has serious cardio issues. That's reared its ugly head multiple times, and she looks like she's probably going to gas out a few minutes into the second round. Now, fortunately for Istela Nunes, she's not going to have to deal with a whole lot of takedown attempts coming from Jauregui, but if Jauregui starts to put a pace on her, or on the other side takes a beating and then Istela Nunes has nothing left, then you're looking at a situation where in the second and third round, Jauregui takes over. If you're betting Yasmin Jauregui this week, what you're hoping is that she's investing in the body in those first 5 minutes. Hooks to the body, straight punches downstairs, front kicks to the solar plexus. These are all things that you hope that she does so that she could tire Istela Nunes out, because while Istela Nunes Nunes is talented, those cardio issues are going to be something that keeps me off of her for the foreseeable future. Not a ton of people are going to get here either, but I probably don't get here either myself because she's not going to be looking for takedowns. She's going to be throwing strikes, but even in her last fight, she wasn't throwing a ton of strikes. But who knows? If Istela Nunes is willing to give her that time and space for her to put a lot out there, then you're looking at a situation where even if she doesn't land a ton of significant strikes, as long as a lot of strikes are being thrown out there, then she could score well. I think the most likely outcome in this fight is we see Yasmin Jauregui win a decision. Istela Nunes probably wins the first round, drops round 2 and round 3, but Jauregui probably does what she did in her first UFC fight and score around 65, maybe 75 DraftKings points. At this price, this is an easy fade for me. She's going to be low owned, but I don't even think it's worth taking a shot. I will have 0 Yasmin Jauregui this week. Next at 9,200, we have Marc Diakiese. He's fighting Michael Johnson this week. This should be easy work for Diakiese for one reason and one reason only. That sweet red mohawk. I'm kidding. No, the reason is because Marc Diakiese does something that we wish all fighters did, and that's take the path of least resistance. In his last 2 fights, he was matched up against guys that were equally as talented as him on the feet, maybe a little bit less so in one of those fights, but you're looking at a situation where the only way that he was losing either of those is by keeping the fight standing. So intelligently, he turned to his wrestling, stuck with it, and he has had incredible results. And not just from a competition perspective, but from a DraftKings point of view as well, scoring 119 points, 113 points. He's been a monster. And I expect him to do something similar this week. Now, it's tough because historically, Michael Johnson has decent takedown defense, but I think that Marc Diakiese is good enough on the feet to open up those opportunities to secure takedowns. Marc Diakiese probably garners a decent amount of ownership this week. I don't think he's going to be one of the highest owned fighters on the slate, but I do think a lot of people are going to get here, and it's for good reason. Like we've talked about on this channel for the last year and some change, wrestling, grappling, that is the most heavily rewarded type of fighting that you can get from DraftKings. You're going to score 5 points for the takedown. You're going to score time for the control time. There's going to be strikes landed when they're in a dominant position. You want your fighter taking down their opponent as often as possible, and I think Marc Diakiese is going to do that. And I might add that I have absolutely no faith in Michael Johnson. Nobody knows how to lose a fight better than Michael Johnson. He loses focus, he gets tired, and he makes mistakes. When he got knocked out in the last minute of his fight against Josh Emmett, that was like when the Warriors blew a 3-1 lead. Same deal when he fights Thiago Moises, piecing him up and then heel hooked as soon as the second round starts. It was ridiculous. And yes, he recently smoked Alan Patrick, who looked like he was moving in slow motion. And he went to war with Jamie Malarkey, but I'm still not convinced. I can't trust Michael Johnson, and I do expect Diakiese to win comfortably this week. From a DraftKings perspective, when we start building lineups, we are going to put Diakiese in quite a bit because if he's rinse and repeating these takedowns, especially later in the fight, you're looking at a situation where he probably breaks 100 points once again. I don't think he finishes Michael Johnson. The menace is historically tough, but I do think that Marc Diakiese wins, so give me Marc Diakiese by decision. Next at 9,100, we have Kyle Daukaus. He's going to be fighting your boy, Eric Anders, this week. I love Kyle Daukaus in this spot, and it's more so me not liking Eric Anders than it is me loving Kyle Daukaus, if I'm being completely honest. Eric Anders is 6-7 in the UFC. He's slow. He doesn't excel at any one aspect of MMA either. There's nothing that Eric Anders is known for in the sport. Some guys have big power, crazy speed, elite wrestling, or maybe they have a favorite jiu-jitsu technique like how Kyle Daukaus loves the Darce. But Eric Anders is like the bottom of a burger bun. And I'm not saying that Eric Anders is on the burger list, but he's like the bottom bun on a burger. You've never been to Red Robin with your family and somebody says, this burger's great, but you know what's setting it off? This bottom bun. Eric Anders is the bottom bun. He's very low output. He fades the longer fights go, and he spends a lot of unnecessary time in the clinch. Kyle Daukaus is a serviceable striker. I don't want to say that he's throwing crazy hands, but he knows what he's doing. But we all know where he wants this fight. He wants this fight on the mat. Eric Anders is a big, strong guy who isn't easy to get down, but I think once he does get down there, that's when Kyle Daukaus is going to have a lot of success and be able to control Eric Anders pretty well. I think that he's actually live for a submission here. It is hard to say that with a lot of confidence because Eric Anders has only been finished once by submission in his career, and that was to Andre Muniz. We saw Andre Muniz absolutely have his way with Eric Anders in their fight, securing multiple takedowns, finding the back, looking like he's slipping off, and then putting an armbar in. It was beautiful. And I'm not comparing Nunes to Daukaus when it comes to grappling. I think that's a stark contrast, but I say that to say this, we've seen it before. I'm hesitant to put Kyle Daukaus in my lineups because it might just end up being a decision win where he controls Eryk Anders for a majority of the round, doesn't score that well, maybe doesn't throw a ton of strikes from a dominant position because he doesn't want Anders to get up, but Eryk Anders not that dangerous, and that's why I can't pick him to win. I do like Kyle Daukaus to win either by decision or by submission. And next at 9,000 we have Sergei Pavlovich. He's going to be fighting Tai Tuivasa this week. For DraftKings, you absolutely need to have the winner of this fight in your lineups. This fight will not go the distance, and the winner is going to have at a minimum 1 knockdown, which is worth 10 precious DraftKings points. Heavyweight MMA, anything could happen, especially in a matchup between knockout artists like these guys, but I do like Sergei Pavlovich to win this fight. And I'm a big Tai Tuivasa guy. I think we all are, if we're being realistic. But we are making predictions here, and the prediction is based off of a huge reach advantage that you see on Sergei Pavlovich, rocking 9 inches of reach. Well, maybe not 9 inches of reach. If that was the case, he'd be like, but a 9-inch reach advantage, which is huge. These guys are going to be standing and banging 9 inches. You can cancel Christmas. Game over. But to go a step further, if we look at Tai Tuivasa's recent fights, he got beaten badly by Ciryl Gane, which no shame in that. Ciryl Gane's world class, could very well be the best heavyweight in the planet right now, but Ciryl Gane beat the shit out of him. Rocked in his fight before that by Derek Lewis, and 2 fights before that he was hit cleanly and wobbled by Greg Hardy. If Pavlovich has any of the same success that those guys had this weekend, he's going to pick up a knockout, and it's probably pretty early. And look at what he's done on DraftKings since his UFC debut, clearing 100 points every single time, and I don't think that changes this week. And considering that we're not far removed from Tuivasa's fight with Ciryl Gane, I think that Tuivasa gets knocked out here probably in the first round and has to take around 6 months off to recover. Now, if you're somebody out there who's picking Tai Tuivasa to win, I respect it. I can't be mad at that. I can't be mad at you picking the guy who dropped Ciryl Gane. I mean, the guy's got undeniable power. I think Tai Tuivasa has a chance to win any fight against any man on the planet, so if you have him in your lineups, more power to you. But for me, I am going to go with the length, I'm going to go with the momentum, and I'm going to go with the guy who's got tighter hands and cleaner boxing. So give me Sergei Pavlovich by knockout, and I expect it to be in the first round. Now, those are premium options. Above 9,000, you're probably going to be able to get 1, maybe 2 of them in most of your lineups. We'll take a look at that when we build lineups, but before we continue, if you don't mind, like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment something for the algorithm. You know how the algorithm works. If you want to leave the script for B-Movie in the comment section, I don't mind. If you want to leave the lyrics to Juicy in the comment section, I don't mind. If you want to write what your height, weight, vertical leap, and wingspan is in the comment section, I don't mind. Anything for the comment section, because just 1 comment a day can feed Oscar, believe it or not. I can show you that data later, but trust me. Now we can start looking at the mid-range fighters priced between 8,000 and 9,000, with Natan Levy being our most expensive at 8,900. He's fighting Gerardo Valdez this week. This is probably another fight where you're going to need the winner in your lineups. And I say that because Gerardo Valdez is all gas, no brakes. He's going to throw bombs. He's live to knock Natan Levy out in the first round here. And on the other side, you have Natan Levy, who should dominate during the grappling exchanges should they arise. I could see him wearing Valdez out, racking up takedown after takedown, similar to what he did against Mike Breeden. Now, where I struggle with this one is the price of Levy and how the public is all over him. He's going to be a popular play this week. He has been since he's come into the UFC, but I think Valdez is one of the, if not the most live underdog on the entire card. Natan Levy is less than impressive on the feet, and he didn't even attempt to take down in either fight against Rafa Garcia or against Mike Breeden. And in both of those fights, he found himself on the mat quite a bit, so for him to not be aggressive when it comes to submissions, that's a little cause for concern for me. So the jury is still out, in my opinion, on Natan Levy. Mike Breeden was a gift. Rafa Garcia was supposed to be a winnable fight for him, but he ended up not looking great. Valdez gets knocked out in his debut against Matt Frivola, but Frivola has been on a tear, and we just saw him dispose of Ottman Azaitar pretty easily, even after heavy line movement. So we have a situation where the paths of victory are very clear for both of these guys. It's just a matter of who's going to execute. You have Valdez by knockout, or you have Natan Levy dominating with his wrestling. For that reason, and given the price, I do prefer going with the underdog here. I want to get my money back from what Matt Frivola did to me when this dude was making his debut. Give me Valdez, likely at lower ownership, to find a knockout inside the first or second round. Now, I know that Valdez doesn't really have a chin. I know. And I hate betting on these fighters that don't have chins but have the tools to get it done. And by hate, I mean I hate myself after I do it because they lose and I go, I knew I shouldn't have picked that guy. But I do love the upside that he's going to bring to the table, and I do love the price point, and I love the leverage that we're going to get, because I expect a lot of people to play Natan Levy, or at least a lot of people not to play Valdez. So give me Valdez. Give me Valdez by knockout. Next at 8,800, we have Francis Marshall. He's a huge fan of the show. He's going to be making his UFC debut this week against Marcelo Rojo, and you absolutely have to love the 23-year-old in this fight. He's going to find the back and sink in a rear naked choke at some point. Most of Marcelo Rojo's losses are by way of submission. That's the most likely outcome here. Now, I do like Marcelo Rojo. I don't think that he wins, but he does fight hard. He throws solid combinations, but the holes in his game are too wide to ignore, and that 11-year age gap is pretty considerable as well. So I won't have any Marcelo Rojo this week. I actually think Francis Marshall is one of the most interesting plays on the entire slate, because he isn't cheap. He's not a household name. He's making his UFC debut, and most people are going to plug in guys like Pavlovich, RDA, Natan Levy, Kevin Holland, and that's going to make it difficult for you to be able to afford somebody like Francis Marshall. So at 8,800, I think he's sneaky. And if this fight ends up looking like any of his other fights, he's going to score a ton of points on DraftKings. So he's offering you a very high ceiling as well. One of the highest, if not the highest on the card. So give me the new kid to get it done with his wrestling, staying busy on top, finding the back, and finishing this fight. Give me Francis Marshall by submission. Next at 8,700, you have to ask yourself, why so serious? Jack Hermansson, the Joker, he's fighting Roman Dolidze this week, who is really pissing me off. I got beef with you, Roman. I picked Roman Dolidze to beat Trevin Giles, and of all people, Trevin Giles is the one that beats him. So I say, okay, I wash my hands with you, Roman. You're on the burger list. I don't want anything to do with you. But then he burns me because I pick Kyle Daukaus to beat him, kicks Kyle Daukaus' ass, and then he does the same thing with Phil Hawes. No respect for me. I don't like it. I get no respect. So I'm scared to pick against him this week given our history, but I think that I have to pick Jack Hermansson because he's so solid. Jack Hermansson completely outclassed Chris Curtis last time out, which is a huge feather in his cap in my opinion. We know how tricky Hermansson is on the mat, and Roman might have to turn to his wrestling if he's not having success on the feet. And Hermansson has that dog in him. We saw that when he fought Sean Strickland. We saw that in his fight against Marvin Vettori. So I don't think that Roman Dolidze is going to come in here and knock Jack Hermansson out. I don't see that happening, and I think the grappling between the two is pretty even. Roman Dolidze is stepping in on short notice. He just fought a few weeks ago, so I'm going to go with Jack Hermansson to get it done in this spot, lean on his footwork like he did against Chris Curtis, and do what he does best on the mat if the fight goes there. I think this is a fight where people are going to play it too much. I think both sides of this matchup probably go over-owned. I'm not looking to play a lot of Jack Hermansson because I do think that it's probably going to be a decision. He scored 70 last time. Before that, in a decision win, he scored 97, which is awesome, but I don't think he's going to be taking Roman Dolidze down and controlling him for over 7 minutes. In my opinion, I see him coming up with a decision win, scoring about 85 points, and on this slate with this many fights, you're going to need a really high score this week. This is going to be one of the higher scoring weeks we'll see all year. Give me Jack Hermansson to win by decision. From a DraftKings perspective, I probably stay away. Next at 8,600 is Scott Holtzman. He's fighting Clay Guida this week. This is a fight that I don't want any part of. That's the benefit of having so many fights on the card, is you can kind of pick and choose your spots with more freedom. If we had a smaller card, like 10, 11 fights, you don't want to just so liberally say, I'm not going to play these guys, but these guys are not going to be in my pool at all. And I say that because you got Scott Holtzman on one side who's not going to take Clay Guida down, no chance. And then you have Clay Guida who's going to try to take Scott Holtzman down. He's probably not going to be able to get him down because Scott Holtzman Holtzman has decent takedown defense. What I expect from this fight is a lot of clinching up against the fence, lower output. I don't see either of these guys breaking 100 significant strikes. I think Scott Holtzman is very comfortably going to win at least 2 of these rounds and win a decision for himself this week, but this isn't the kind of fight that I would roster, and I wouldn't suggest that you do either. Nor is this the kind of fight that I would suggest that you bet, because you're looking at a situation where Scott Holtzman should win for all the reasons that I said, but also Clay Guida has a judge-friendly style. Guida is constantly moving. He's putting a lot out there. They're going to be in front of a crowd, so they're going to be on the Carpenter side, and that could sway the judges, even though they try to make you think it can't. So I would say approach this one with caution, but don't hang your hat on this for DraftKings. I would pass on this completely. For DFS, for betting, but the pick for me in this fight is going to be Scott Holtzman by decision. He picks his shots well, he keeps his feet throughout this fight, and he wins most of the rounds. Next at 8,500 is our main event favorite, one of my favorite fighters on the entire roster, Big Mouth, the Trailblazer, Kevin Holland. Being ripped out of the clutches of retirement to come back and headline a show against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, which is an ideal matchup for fan entertainment. We all love a good striker versus grappler matchup when we see one, but this is a situation where both of these guys can strike at a very high level, and it should be a good time. Now, if they made this fight, say 3 years ago, I would have picked Wonderboy, no question, but Kevin Holland has gotten a lot better since joining the UFC, and I expect him to pick up a TKO finish this week. We've talked about this on this channel before. Kevin Holland at 170 pounds is a monster. He's a lot younger, he's right in his fighting prime, he's taller, he's longer, he's faster, he's physically stronger, and Kevin Holland has what Wonderboy doesn't, which is one-shot knockout power in his hands, and we've seen Wonderboy rocked before. We saw him get cracked by Woodley, buckled by Darren Till, knocked out by Anthony Pettis, and Kevin Holland throws bombs. And one thing about Holland that I don't see enough people talk about is the hand speed. Every time I watch Kevin Holland fight and he starts throwing hooks, I am blown away by how fast they're coming. It's scary, and it seems like it's something that's tough to game plan for. He throws those things fast. He's throwing hooks like bantamweights throw hooks, and if he gets Thompson near the cage, backs him up, Thompson's bouncing around waiting for his opportunity to counter strike, bam, one of those hooks are going to come through. I promise you that. And Wonderboy obviously is extremely difficult to game plan for with his style. I remember during an interview he said, who are you going to call to emulate his style in training camp? And it's true. Who are you going to call? There's nobody that fights the way that he fights. But with 5 rounds to work, I expect Kevin Holland to find a finish at some point. Plus, Wonderboy doesn't have a ton of power. His most recent knockout was 7 years ago against Johnny Hendricks, which at the time really wasn't saying much. So don't be surprised when Kevin Holland crashes the pocket with confidence. And the last thing I'll say about this fight is that Kevin Holland could submit Wonderboy if this fight gets to the mat. Now, Wonderboy does have solid submission defense. He showed that against Dorino Burns, but he was controlled for a lot of that fight. Kevin Holland could dominate him on the mat with his size. So give me the guy with more tools to get it done, more power, and a clear path to the top of the division. Despite his retirement talk, Kevin Holland could be firmly in the top 10 if he wanted to be. And Kevin Holland not only wins this fight, but he wins this fight by knockout in the 3rd round. And I say that because I'm not joking when I tell you this. I had a dream last night where I saw a bet slip with RDA inside the distance and Kevin Holland 3rd round knockout, and it came through. 3rd round knockout for Kevin Holland at the time of recording this is plus 1,200 on DraftKings Sportsbook. Book it. Next at 9,400, we have Niko Price. He's fighting the Fresh Prince Philip Rowe this week. Pretty noteworthy size discrepancy here, with Phil Rowe being a lot taller and slightly longer than Niko Price. I think that's going to loom largely during this fight. I expect Rowe to dominate the striking exchanges on the feet here with the crisp boxing, and I see him finding a knockout in the 1st or 2nd round. Niko Price is solid. He has swapped largely wins and losses in the UFC. He has a nice highlight reel, but it's over guys like James Vick and Tim Means. A great finish over Randy Brown off his back, but then George Sullivan, Alan Jouban. He isn't beating elite competition. Conversely, he's been finished twice by Vicente Luque, knocked out by Jeff Neal, starched by Abdul Razak Al Hassan. If he chooses to stand or is forced to stand and trade with Philip Rowe this week, he's getting slept. Niko Price's only path to victory here is if he's able to wrestle Phil Rowe and keep him down on the mat, maybe find a submission. Rowe has been taken down in the UFC before in all of his UFC fights and his fight on Contender Series. But for someone as young in their career as Phil Rowe, you know that's a major focus of his for the last few years. So if he shores up that takedown defense, he's going to mop up the lower tier of the welterweight division and find himself yourself fighting ranked guys within the next 12 months, give me the Fresh Prince to get it done. Give me the Fresh Prince by knockout. Next at 8,300, we have Emily Ducote. She's fighting Angela Hill this week, and this is a tough fight to call, and I hate to do this, but I think Angela Hill wins. Obviously, she has much better experience against stronger competition. She can also match the volume of Ducote, which I think is important because Ducote's going to put a lot out there. But what Angela Hill has over her as well is that she can mix it up. If she's looking for takedowns or trips or even changing levels just to give Ducote something else to think about, I worry for Ducote in this spot. But I also worry for Angela Hill that she won't have enough big moments in rounds to sway judges. And if Ducote puts out more volume, then we could see a situation where Angela Hill loses a close round, which happens a lot to Angela Hill, let's be honest. Angela Hill has seen more bad decisions than a blackjack dealer, and now she has a young, new, aggressive prospect on her hands who throws a ton of strikes, so a decision could get greasy, it could be shaky, and it could go either way. I think Angela Hill needs to win rounds convincingly to not get robbed here, but I think she has the capacity to do that. Again, it wouldn't surprise me if we had a split decision go either way, but I do think that Angela Hill wins this fight. From a DraftKings perspective, I probably stay away. I don't think that she's going to do enough to dominate Emily Ducote, and for that reason, she probably doesn't score that many points. But as a straight pick, I do like Angela Hill to win by decision. And the last fight that we're going to look at before we start getting into lineups is we're going to look at Amanda Ribas versus Tracey Cortez. This is a great job by the matchmakers because this fight could go either way. This puts us in a tight spot. What I like from Cortez is obviously the wrestling. She's got phenomenal control from a top position, especially against BJJ players like Amanda Ribas. And we saw Cortez have a lot of success in a similar situation in her last fight against Melissa Gatto, and she's coming out of one of the strongest gyms in MMA right now at Fight Ready. On the other side, Amanda Ribas has also looked good in the UFC, and she's fought tougher competition within the promotion like Caitlin Chookagian or Marina Rodriguez, Mackenzie Dern to a lesser extent. And what Amanda Ribas has shown us is toughness, definitely cardio, decent striking, and a solid submission ability, which should come as no surprise. She's also shown good takedown defense, which will definitely be tested this week. Now, if she does keep the feet, or if she finds takedowns of her own, she's probably going to win this fight. But if she finds herself on bottom at any point, she's probably going to end up losing that round because of that crazy top game from Tracey Cortez. So I'm torn here because I like the athleticism and the well-roundedness from Amanda Ribas, but I also like the top pressure and wrestling from Tracey Cortez. From a DraftKings perspective, I think that Tracey Cortez is the sharper play and the stronger play. She might be lower owned than Ribas in this fight, and if she gets her wrestling going, then you're going to be in a good spot. I'm confident in her ability to get the fight to the ground, and I'm also confident in the likelihood that she doesn't get caught with something like an armbar from guard or a triangle choke. I don't think that Amanda Ribas is going to submit her from her back. So I do like Tracey Cortez to win this fight. I think Tracey Cortez by decision is the most likely outcome. Tracey Cortez by stoppage, I don't see that happening at all. Just take the over. You'll be all right. Now we can start building some lineups, but before we do, if you haven't already, just a reminder, like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment something for the algorithm. You know how it works. And we'll start by looking at a cash game lineup. What you should be doing in your cash games, it's pretty straightforward this week. I think it makes a lot of sense this week for you to go ahead and stack up the main event. You've got Kevin Holland, you've got Stephen Thompson. Now you just need to figure out the rest. This is where we're going to go ahead and punt one of the cheaper plays on the slate. Darren Elkins makes sense to me. 9,000 left over. Now we can come all the way up here and grab somebody else. We can grab somebody like Sergei Pavlovich if you wanted. You can grab somebody like Francis Marshall. Now you've got 9,300 left over. This is a little dicey for me because Sergei Pavlovich is fighting Tuivasa. So I would take him out in this situation, and I would put RDA in there for a more guaranteed win. 8,700 left over. You've got Jack Hermansson. He's in a tough matchup. Scott Holtzman, again, not somebody I want to touch. I think I'm going to find myself coming down here and grabbing somebody like Tracey Cortez. I don't think that's crazy. Leaving salary on the table in cash games probably isn't something that most people are going to do, but I do think that you've got solid matchups that you're attacking here. You can confidently say that you're going to get a winner from the main event, obviously. RDA is going to win. Marshall's going to win. You've got Cortez in a decent matchup, and then you've got Elkins, who's your punt play. This is a cash game lineup. You're leaving 700 salary on the table, but I do think that it makes sense. Now, if you wanted to come off of somebody like Wonder Boy and you wanted to go grab somebody like Angela Hill, I think that makes sense. Or you could go the other way in that matchup with Emily Ducote if you think she's going to get it done. But that's about how I would suggest attacking your cash games. If you want to send me on Twitter at Kunith MMA screenshots of your lineup and I can tell you what I think, especially for cash games, just let me know what contest you're in. Now, we get rid of that and we look at some GPP, some tournament stuff. How do we win all the money? Well, there are a couple of things that I think I'm going to avoid this week. I don't think you absolutely need to play the main event. With 15 fights, there's a lot of ways to get different. I also think that if you leave salary on the table, that's going to help you get a lot more different than everybody else. When I'm looking at this, one of the first people that catch my eye is definitely Gerano Valdez and 7,300. I also like Philip Rowe this week. I like him even more than Valdez. I think he should be the favorite, honestly. I'm surprised he's not. Sergei Pavlovich, Francis Marshall. I mean, these are all the people that we were talking about how we needed them prior to. Now you've got 85.50 left over per fighter. So to open up a little bit of salary, I think we should stick in the mid-range here. And I think I'm going to grab somebody like Tracey Cortez for those takedowns. And then I can come all the way up here to somebody like Kyle Daukaus if I wanted to. Now, I don't absolutely love that. I really don't. And I don't think that it's being risky enough, especially considering that you haven't left any salary on the table. So I'm going to blow this up and I'm going to come all the way down here to one of my punt plays who I have a lot of confidence in, which is Darren Elkins. Now, I think the winner of the Darren Elkins JSP fight gets dominated. So if he goes out there and gets starched, don't hate me for it, but I do think that if he goes out there and wins, it's going to look pretty dominant. Now you can come all the way up here to somebody like RDA. There you go. You've left 800 salary on the table. You're not playing the main event. This is something that's pretty different. You're not going to see a whole lot of this. Now, if you don't love Darren Elkins in this lineup, I get it. I would take him out and RDA out, and I would come here to somebody like Marc Diakiese, for example. 7,900 left over, so we're going to have to grab ourselves an underdog. When we look at the available underdogs that are left, I don't love many of them. I really don't. You don't want to play somebody who's already in the lineup like Pavlovich. You don't want to play Tuivasa in this lineup, obviously, so he's out. Angela Hill historically doesn't score very well. I don't want that. Stephen Thompson, main event. I don't really want that. Clay Guida. I don't really want that. You're stuck kind of playing Roman Dolidze, which is funny. This has come full circle. We have our beef Roman, and now we're here. What are we going to do? If I did play Roman Dolidze, I've left 400 salary on the table, no RDA, no main event. We're different. If you didn't want to play Roman Dolidze, you can come here to somebody like, I guess all that's really left is playing somebody like Istela Nunes, Matt Schnell, Darren Elkins, who we just took out, Brian Barberena, who has absolutely no chance. But that's one way you could attack it. Now, if you think, Kevin Holland has 5 rounds to work, he's probably going to do pretty well. I do want to put him in my lineup. Well, that's what we can do. We could put him in the lineup. We can come up here to Sergei Pavlovich. We can grab Marshall. We can come down here to somebody like Philip Rowe, wherever he is. There he is. 2 spots left to fill, so now you're sitting here trying to decide basically between somebody like Gerano Valdez, Roman Dolidze. Let's say we went back with Dolidze just to see what else we can do. It leaves us with Ducote, Ribas, Cortez, Hill. Not really convinced. I don't know if I love this. So I'm going to go ahead and take Roman Dolidze out, and I'll come all the way back down here to Darren Elkins, and then I'll come all the way back up here to somebody like Marc Diakiese. Now, this lineup is featuring the main event. You're also not leaving any salary on the table, so you might not be getting too different with something like that. But let's say you wanted to go the other way in the heavyweight fight. So if we came down here, we grab somebody like Tai Tuivasa. This gives us 8,500 left over. So what I would do at this point is probably grab somebody like Tracey Cortez and Philip Rowe, and now I've got 9,700 left over. Now you could choose whoever you want. If you wanted to go with JSP, you could. If you wanted to get that extra security with RDA, you could. You've left 100 salary on the table. This isn't the most unique lineup of all time, but it is a solid one. Now, if you were part of the other camp and you think that Wonder Boy has the goods and he can get it done this week, well, let's just stick in this range here. We'll grab Phil Rowe. I'll come down here to Gerano Valdez, really just to open things up for us now, because now we can grab Marshall, we can come up here to Pavlovich, and we still have enough to be able to afford somebody like Marc Diakiese. You've left 200 salary on the table, but this is also a pretty solid lineup in my opinion. If you wanted to go a step further, take somebody like Valdez out, come down here, grab the damage. We've got 800 salary left over. We can come to Diakiese. We could take him out and we could put in RDA, or we can take Marshall out and we get back to Diakiese. And now that I'm looking at this, another way we could spin it, take Pavlovich out, go grab the other side of that fight with Tuivasa. Now you have an underdog, an underdog, an underdog, an underdog, and then two big favorites, but you're not about to leave 1,800 on the table. And this isn't a bad lineup by any stretch. Just because there's a lot of salary left over doesn't mean it's a bad lineup. There are a lot of situations where at the end of the night, if you go back and you look at the optimal lineup, you're going to notice that the optimal lineup would have left $2,000 salary on the table. It's not uncommon. But if you were in this position and you wanted to change something, I would recommend changing Darren Elkins out and then probably grabbing somebody in this range. I would say going back to Tracey Cortez. 500 salary on the table, you got it done. Now, if you want to be super weird and super against the grain, you grab somebody like JSP. You came down here and you grabbed somebody like Niko Price, who I don't think a lot of people are going to be on. You run with Scott Holtzman just to be an absolute weirdo. Istela Nunes ends up getting it done somehow. You come down here to somebody like Michael Johnson, who's a 50-50 fight against the Hulk, technically. I mean, he's a 50-50 fight against anybody. And then you come here to somebody like Sergei Pavlovich, for example, or you come here to somebody like Natan Levy. This is a weird lineup. This is the lineup that ends up winning the big contest because no one was going to play this combination of people. So just be mindful when you're making your lineups. How weird am I? How weird am I? I'm not actually asking you that, Oscar. Between you and I, you're the weird one. I'm weird. You wore swim trunks and boxing gloves to your wedding. And we're going to quickly wrap up by just giving you the plays for each fight on the slate. I do think that Yasmin Jauregui wins, and I think it's by decision. I do think that Francis Marshall wins by submission. Valdez by knockout. I like Tracey Cortez by decision. I like Darren Elkins to get it done. Huge line, wide, way too wide. Marc Diakiese, another wide line, another very wide line, but I do like Marc Diakiese. Scott Holtzman, that's more just not wanting to play Clay Guida. Angela Hill at plus 100, don't mind that. Philip Rowe, slight dog there. He probably should be the favorite, and don't be surprised if you see that swing by the time the fights start. Jack Hermansson, Kyle Daukaus. You've got Sergei Pavlovich, first round knockout. Matheus Nicolau by decision, very wide line here as well. You've got RDA, wide line, but justifiably wide. And then you've got Kevin Holland to get it done in the main event. $10 bet pays you $38,000. So, yeah. Go ahead and win that and then send some over to me and we'll all be happy. If you've made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, send me your lineups. We'll do all those good things. We'll all win money this week. We'll somehow all win all the contests. I'm feeling good about it.